Hey folks, Mr. Howard here, and let me see if I can get my head in this picture. Yeah, there we go. Down on my guest room, just to do a quick lesson about timed writings. So, I mean, obviously you've written a number of timed writings. We were just getting into writing prose timed writings a little bit in class right before coronavirus shut us down. And it turns out that prose timed writing is going to be the type that we're going to have on the AP exam. Good news, I think it's the easiest one. Yeah, bad news is the one we spent the least time on in class. But we did cover it, and so this is technically review material, and so I'm good. I can teach this to you again and cover again what I taught you in class before we wrote the Oscar Wilde timed writing on Lady Windermere's Fan. So I gave you a timed writing last week. It was on D.H. Lawrence's book, The Rainbow, and that's what I'm going to use to do this lesson today. I'll give you another one later this week, and then you can use what I've taught you in this video lesson and go try and write your own timed writing and send it in to me, and I'll get you constructive feedback. Obviously, there won't be a grade or anything like that, but I will get you as much information as I can to help you out, to help you grow, to make you a better timed writer before that AP exam comes along. This is all your eggs in one basket kind of a timed writing. I mean, normally on the AP exam, you have a multiple choice section, you have 3 timed writings. If one part of it's bad, no big deal. On the converse, on the bonus side, if one part of it's really good, that's the only part they get to look at. So if you nail this thing, you end up getting much better credit than you might have otherwise. So I want you all to nail it. And I recommend that you take it. Go ahead and what do you have to lose? There's no downside. It's only 45 minutes of your life. You sit down, you write the timed writing, you submit it, and if you get credit, you get credit, and that's wonderful. So I don't see a downside to taking the timed writing at all. So let's talk prose timed writing. First thing is you really need to understand the question to write a good answer. So the prompt, the prose timed writing prompt, generally all prose timed writing prompts have sort of like the same information in them. Sometimes the information is sort of juggled up or jumbled up in different ways, but it's pretty much stable. You'll have background information like the author, the time period, the name of the work. They'll give you context. A lot of times context involves things like who the characters are and where's the setting, when and where is it taking place. Sometimes they'll give you the conflict. There's a conflict between these people about this thing. And that helps you understand or have the context to read and analyze successfully what they've given you. Sometimes the title helps you, sometimes the title does not. So don't spend a ton of time thinking about it, but do spend a passing thought. Once you've read the excerpt, go back and look at the title and see if that helps, bring some thoughts into your mind. So that's sentence 1. Sentence 1 of the prompt is pretty much always your contextual information. And if you know the time period, great. If you know the author, great. If you don't need to. There's no expectation that you're so well read that you're going to know every author that they throw at you. So don't worry about that. Then we get sentence 2. Sentence 2 generally is very small in 2 words. Read carefully. They'll tell you to read the excerpt carefully or read carefully the following excerpt. This is code. They want you to annotate it. Read carefully means when you're reading, you got to pay attention to all of those literary elements that will help you understand what the author is doing. And the only way to do that, in my opinion, is to annotate. So get out your pencil, give the thing a good solid 7 to 10 minute read where you annotate everything that you can see there. So read carefully. Then sentence 3, it's only a 3-sentence prompt. The last sentence is going to be the instructions, and these vary widely depending on what they're asking you to do. However, there are certain commonalities to every timed writing. They're usually looking for, literary devices, literary elements, something like that. So they'll say, how does the author use literary devices to develop X, Y, Z, whatever it happens to be. And these can vary depending on the excerpt and what they're looking for. But it's always how does the author, so you've got to talk about the author and the author's craft. You've got to be reading this not as somebody who's reading for fun, but as somebody who's reading critically. We have an author. The author is writing it in such a way as to lead, impact, control the reading experience of the reader and get them to think or react in certain ways. So how does the author use literary devices to create whatever. Usually what they're looking for is complexity or nuance, or they're looking for theme. I will tell you that probably a third of these prompts have to do with characterization, how one of the characters is characterized, or how the relationship of two characters is with each other. So how does the author develop character? Characterization is code for sort of like development of character. So we'll have to look at the particular prompt to get that. But let's take a look at the prompt that I gave you for the timed writing that you had. It says this: the following passage is from D.H. Lawrence's 1915 novel, The Rainbow, which focuses on the lives of the Brangwens, a farming family who lived in rural England during the 19th century. Read the passage carefully, then write an essay in which you analyze how Lawrence employs literary devices to characterize the woman and capture her situation. Pause. Actually, if it would help you to look at this as you go through, you can just go down to the class webpage and you can go back to the assignment. You can click the link and open it up. It's question 2, so scroll down to question 2 and you'll have this question to look at. Alternately, if that seems like a lot of clicks to you, you can just type 2013 AP English Literature and Composition free response questions into the computer and it should bring it up in Google. But let's look at this. First sentence, just like I said, the following passage is from D.H. Lawrence's 1915 novel, The Rainbow. So if you know who D.H. Lawrence is, great. If you don't worry about it. 1915, hey, that's like post-Victorian, right? Like, so the Victorian age is over, and just shortly thereafter, we're dealing with World War I. We're dealing with, those sorts of things. If you can put it in its historical context, that may help you. That's when it's being written. The novel's called The Rainbow. Rainbows are symbolic of overcoming storms or, light at the end of the tunnel sort of things. So I don't know if that's useful, but I would pick that up just looking at the prompt. Then it's going to give you some context on the story. It focuses on the lives of the Brangwens, a farming family. So we're dealing with a rural family who lived in rural England during the late 19th century. So it's set in the Victorian age in a rural situation. Now, the Victorian age is like the big industrial revolution. We got smokestacks and trains, and so there's probably going to be, just from reading the prompt, some contrast between rural life and city life, something like that going on because the Victorian times being what they were. And so we've got a setting, we've got characters, the Brangwen family, we've got lots of information here. All of this is background, it's context. Great, that's sentence 1. Sentence 2, read the passage carefully. Annotate, right? There's your code. Sentence 3. Then, and this is the important sentence, that final sentence that tells you exactly what they want you to do, tells you what the task is the really important sentence. If you screw that up, your essay is not going to follow what they want it to do. So pay very close attention to what they're asking you. It says, then write an essay in which you analyze how Lawrence, the author, employs literary devices to characterize the woman and capture her situation. So you've got sort of 2 tasks in here. Number 1, how does the author characterize the woman? How's the author develop her character? Characterize is a fun word because it can take you back to 9th grade or 10th grade or wherever it was when you learned the difference between direct and indirect characterization, right? Like authors characterize or develop the characters of their characters, their moral codes, their viewpoints, their outlook on the world, those sorts of things in a couple of different ways. Direct characterization is when the narrator or the author tells you something about a character so you don't have to think about it. Whereas indirect characterization is much more frequent and much better for analysis. That's when a character or the author implies something about the character through their own words, through their actions. You're not told it outright. You just have to sort of think about it. And that's probably the level of nuance that these AP readers are looking for. So how do we characterize a woman? What is revealed about her morality, her outlook, her thought process? How is she developed as a character through this, excerpt that we've been given? Also, so to characterize a woman, but there's a second part. The second part is and capture her situation. That's very vague language. So we're not just looking at the woman and her character. We're looking at the woman and her character in the situation that she is in. So we've got to answer sort of both those elements to make sense of the prompt. So now let's talk about writing the essay. How do you write a prose essay? Well, the first thing you need is a thesis. On our new 6-point rubric, thesis is 1 point. So you're not going to score the top rated score unless you have thesis, and unless that thesis is nuanced and complicated and getting down to something important. So you got to have a thesis statement. You got to answer the question. So as you read this, you have to discern how the woman is characterized and what her situation is, and then maybe what Lawrence is trying to do with it, how Lawrence is trying to impact the reader. You want to pay attention to that. Try and craft a thesis statement. Then you're going to have to follow a line of reasoning. That's the AP language. That's what they're really looking for, is that you can follow a line of reasoning. So you identify whatever it is and you line it up for the reader and you make it make sense. So you're going to have to make an argument in your essay that uses quotation and analysis. And all of this, the thesis, the line of reasoning, the quotation and the analysis, all of it is directly related to the prompt, to the last sentence of that prompt. You need to make sure you're answering all elements of the questions. So if you really want to have an excellent essay, you've got to get down to that level of complexity and nuance. What's complex about the lady's character? What's complex about her situation? And we'll look at that as we read through the prompt. So how do we organize an essay like this? I learned this new word. Well, I sort of knew it, but I never used it before, and I think it's pretty useful. By watching, have you been watching the AP lessons that they've been putting online daily? It's about 40 minutes, 45 minutes at noon every day, and you can go on and you can watch, and the two teachers are pretty engaging. They do a pretty good job, and they're just teaching you review stuff that I've already taught you, maybe using some elements that we've used in class, but some elements that we've used out of class. But the gentleman on there, he does a really good job of making things relatable to students. And the word that he uses is chunking, and I like that. So I'm going to use that word. I'm just gonna jump on board with it. So how do we chunk out the passage? How do we decide what parts to talk about in what order? I mean, in a poem, you can sort of break it up by literary device, and you can look at the literary devices, or you can chunk the poem. You can look at the poem and you can say, hey, I'm going to talk about this part first, this part second, this part third. You have to do the same thing with your passage, and it needs to really be in the order that it appears on the page. So how do we decide where to break our paragraphs? You're going to write a 5-6 paragraph essay. Your first paragraph's an intro, your last paragraph's a conclusion, which leaves you 3 or 4 body paragraphs to work with. And so how do I break this excerpt down into 3 or 4 parts successfully? So when you read it, you want to be able to chunk your passage into parts that you can make arguments about. So what do you look for? Well, you can look for your basic shifts. Shifts are easy ways to separate the sections. You can also, by shifts, I mean shifts in point of view. Does the narrative perspective or the point of view change at any point? That would be an easy place to stop, and you talk about it one perspective first, and you talk about the second perspective second. Does the tone shift? Is there a clear tone shift? Well, then you talk about the first tone, and then you can talk about the second tone. Is there a clear change in imagery or symbolism or tense? Is there a flashback? All of these things are things that you can use to say, hey, the author made a clear separation between this part and this part, so we're going to talk about these parts separately. And it flows naturally, and it's easy for your reader to read and understand. So that's one of the skills AP is looking for. Your ability to quickly read a passage and understand what the various parts are, and then talk about the parts in succession and unify them in some sort of an overall line of reasoning or argument by the end. So you got to be able to chunk it. The most basic chunking, of course, is paragraphs. I mean, the author chunks it structurally in paragraphs for you. And if you have to rely on paragraphs to do your chunking, fine. Sometimes that works, sometimes that makes sense, but usually each paragraph is separated from the other in topic or tone or imagery or whatever, and it's important that you identify those things too. And sometimes you'll get a passage that has so many paragraphs that you can't just write about each paragraph individually. You don't have a paragraph to write on each one, you'll run out of time. And so you have to be more creative and figure out what it is that you're going to do and how you're going to do it. All right. So some things to look for as you annotate. I'm going to read the passage, and I'm going to verbally annotate it for you as I go through talking about the things that I saw as I read it, and you can compare that to what you saw as you read it. But some things you want to pay attention to, some literary terms, point of view or narrative perspective. Who's your narrator? What point of view do they have? Is it limited? Is it omniscient? Is it past tense? Is it present tense? Is your narrator reliable or unreliable? Oh, great. This is telling me my battery is low. So hopefully we're